Jerry Rice said when he was asked, do you think Brock Purdy has had a good year? Jerry Rice said, no, he hasn't had the best year. I think he only has 15 touchdowns, almost as many interceptions, too. Guys, I don't like making excuses. Everyone is talking about there's so many injuries. I don't care about that. You still have to find a way to win. That's what we did. And I think it's so like, it's interesting. I'm seeing some people in the chat agree with us, some people not. And I think like maybe depending on the time period that you cheered for the 49ers sets the standard of,
Yeah,
winning and what you're willing to accept.
especially with
Um,
Jerry.
I will say, by the way, um, and we are on the Brock Purdy subject, but Steve Young also critiqued Brock Purdy, especially for his play recently last Sunday, but all year, saying that he, isn't really elevating the team and has to work on some things. But he also really criticized Kyle Shanahan's offense, and basically said Kyle needed to go back to the drawing board, that his offense is widespread around the league now. Defenses know what, to expect when facing Kyle Shanahan led teams, and that there needs to be a lot of innovation. I thought that was
Yeah,
kind of interesting because Steve Young, for the most part, has been very, he's quick to praise both Kyle and
yeah.
Brock, 49ers in general. So I appreciated him kind of speaking with passion when talking about one, what Brock is worth to this team. And he wasn't bashing Brock. I see some people in the comments like, the second you suggest Brock shouldn't make 60 million, they're like, "Oh, you don't like Brock." It's like that's not true. We're just trying to be realistic, and I think that's been hard to see. But
Yeah. But I
I
like
thought
what
it was
they had to say. I
yeah,
think they both were great in their comments. I covered Jerry in his rookie year and his second year when I was covering the Niners. And it was amazing to see the growth in Jerry Rice of just who he became in becoming so articulate about the game. He could barely put a sentence together in his rookie year. Coach called a reverse, is basically what the quote Jerry would give you. And then he goes to comments like this, which are amazing
yeah,
and dead on. And it shows that Jerry worked just as hard off the field in
yes.
everything that he did. And one of them was his personal growth. And so it's always something that moves me when I hear Jerry speaking so intelligently and so eloquently
And he
about
spoke
what's
very
going on because I've seen the growth literally. So in terms of what Jerry had to say, he's right. The formations are too condensed and there's not enough room. That the Niners need to find a way. But Jerry is saying that from the perspective of somebody who played in the Walsh era, where you had the coaches and you had the ability in terms of just the collective talent of the entire organization to work through things to get things done. And that's not who this era is. You don't have the Eddie DeBartolo. You don't have Bill Walsh. You don't have Walsh and McVay. You don't have the assistant coaches on the level Walsh had. There's a lot of things where it's just there isn't the same parallels. The Niners also had a lot of leadership from the veteran players, and they set the 49ers standard that Walsh called for, and then the players enforced it. And in this era, I don't think we're seeing that either. Is that we're not seeing leadership from within the locker room, and we're also not seeing leadership from ownership or from the head coaches. Really, is that what we're seeing is inertia, and
yeah.
that's how decisions are being made. Should Brock be paid this? No. Should they move on? Yeah, but when they're operating out of fear, when every question is if not Brock, who, and nobody has an answer, part of that goes back to not having a GM that's capable. Kyle's
Very
biggest
fair.
weakness is evaluating quarterbacks. One of the
Yes.
reasons why you need a new GM is you need to have somebody that can, because it's going to get to the point they're going to sign Brock, they're going to pay him too much, and they're not going to win a ring. And eventually the Yorks are going to say, well, maybe we need to change out of this. Maybe then they'll see the light and get a new GM, but it isn't happening anytime soon. And between now and then, they're not going to win any rings.
I really hope my hope is that, to me, there's no reason to not make Brock Purdy play this year out. I think that if you're right and they're facing, easier competition, and maybe Kyle, can take the advice from Steve Young and Jerry Rice, and he goes back to the drawing board and comes up with some more creativity and innovative play calls. Maybe, just maybe, I don't have a ton of hope in this, but maybe Jed York puts his foot down and says, yeah, we're not going to fire you, Kyle, but we're going to add some other leaders on this team from the, coaching perspective that are going to help you make decisions. We're going to take a little bit of your GM power away. I hope that they, in the same way that people, I've heard so many fans make the argument that Kyle has earned another year to fail before getting fired. I
As
hope that
coach, as coach, as
as a coach,
offensive coordinator, as
I hope that
GM.
I hope that they don't marry themselves to Brock Purdy during that experiment. Like, I want them to be
They
able to
will.
make those decisions together. Because if it goes well and Brock Purdy has a great year and they go back, then okay, you're going to sign him. And Brock Purdy just made himself more money. By the way, people are saying we don't like Brock Purdy. That's what Lamar Jackson did, and he just made himself more money when he bet on himself. Like, it
Yeah.
is not new that teams make their quarterback play out their contract. Like, Brock
Right.
Purdy's contract is not over. He's not a free agent right now. They wouldn't even have to franchise tag him this year. It would just be his normal contract that he's playing on. And right now we've seen one great year, one bad year. Why not get one more year of additional information with Kyle? Because then if you do end up wanting to move on from Kyle, not saying they will, but if they do, then you give that incoming coach or GM the option, do you want this guy to be your franchise guy or not?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Because
true.
if you're married to Brock Purdy and then you fire Kyle Shanahan a year later, then like that messes. We've seen how many quarterbacks that their offensive coordinator and head coach is constantly changing. That doesn't help them as a quarterback. And then also you limit who you're going to get as the head coach, because the head coach has to be someone who wants to coach Brock Purdy. And maybe that coach will, want that, but maybe they won't. And they should be able to make their decision if you're truly in a situation where you're turning the team over. Now,
Right. No, I agree with that. I want to point out what Mr. Corey said in the chat, that Lamar
yeah.
already had millions in the bank. He already had his first bag. Brock doesn't have his first bag yet, so he's
Okay.
not going to bet on himself as a result of that.
That's fair. That's fair. Really quickly, because I don't think we're saying this, especially you're not. Y'all acting like we didn't watch a disaster of a season from Kyle Shanahan, the injuries, the holdouts, the mishaps. Now Brock sucks. I think Tom and I, maybe if this is your first stream, we have talked a lot of Brock heavy in this show, just with all the recent rumors and stuff. But Tom and I have done a million shows. Tom writes articles for SI. I'll gladly link them. You can also follow him at NinerCast on Twitter. They're posted there on Twitter. And Tom and I have been extremely critical of Kyle. And if I was going to blame anyone for this season going wrong, it would be Kyle Shanahan, mostly Kyle Shanahan being the pseudo GM of this team. I think Brock Purdy is a good quarterback. I don't think he's better than Josh Allen, and that's where my frustration is. And like I've tried to clarify a couple times, I'm not even mad at Brock Purdy for wanting that. I'm more mad at the way that the NFL sets up their payments, that the next quarterback to get paid is automatically going to be the highest paid, when I think that it should be based a little bit more on skill. And I think Brock Purdy is more in the Baker Mayfield area than the Josh Allen one. And I don't think that's crazy to say. I might even think
It's
Brock
not.
Purdy
You can
is
point to
top
all
10.
that and
I just
back it
don't
up.
think he's top 3.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's you look at all that, and again, it's all the football arguments you're making. All show have all been absolutely correct.
Yeah.
All of them.
I just wanted to clarify for him, because
But
I don't want
if you
I
make
don't
a
want this.
football argument with these guys,
Yeah.
what's it going
I
to
just wanted to
matter
clarify. Like,
to the
you
Yorks
started the
and
show saying
Kyle?
that next year Brock Purdy's going to have a better year, because the 49ers in general are going to have a better year probably.
I don't know if Purdy's going to have a better year. It's just going to be an easier schedule for them. They play the
Yeah.
AFC North, or the AFC South and the NFC South. Those are the two worst divisions outside of the NFC
And they're
West
going to
in football.
have a
So
less hard strength of schedule. Like, not
yeah,
only are they going against weaker divisions, but also they're not as high up.
right. If they're fourth, then they play the fourth place team. So their schedule is going to be a lot easier next year. I looked at that schedule, and you could easily make the argument that they can go 10-7, even if they play similar to the way they're playing now. The opponents are that bad.
Yeah.
So I think that, while it may not be that they can get the home playoff game the Yorks won, I think that they'll still make the playoffs, though. They
By the way,
would
I
need
think
to
that
have a lot of failure to not make the playoffs with that schedule. But if they do fail, if they don't make the playoffs and the schedule is that easy and you
then you
don't
have
make
to.
any changes, come on. That's when you have to look at it and say, look, you had the easiest schedule in years and you didn't make the playoffs. Bye. You know, I don't know if they would do that with Kyle, but at the very least, they need to do that with Kyle, the GM, minimum. And so, there's a good and a bad side to the schedule being this easy. Is that if Shanahan does fail, that would force the Yorks to take some kind of action. But will they? Probably not, because the team can almost glide through next year and make the playoffs. They
Yeah.
would have to completely collapse. I get your point on the core is older, the CMC's 29, all that, but they'll have another draft and it'll be a draft with a high pick. So even if they only get half the draft picks right, because they're drafting in a higher slot, they'll probably get some decent players. That'll help them.
Fair. I
And so
agree
we'll
with you.
see. We'll see.
I and I think that that's their plan, by the way. I don't think their plan is going to be to tear this team down and start rebuilding at all. I think they are anticipating that they're going to compete, for championships or for the, to go far in the playoffs just next year, especially from the ownership and coaching side. We've seen yesterday Nick Bosa talked. We'll get into it. He talked a little bit about Devondre Campbell, but he talked a lot about this defensive line and wanting the entire D line to get back. He said specifically he thought Leonard Floyd, his progress from the first time they played the Rams to the second was a huge improvement. I think in a lot of areas, when you look at that secondary, Bernardo Green, they obviously have Deommodore Lenore locked up. Seeing Dre Greenlaw back, if they could get him back, I think they need to prioritize Hufanga and Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw. I know that for the most part, I want to get younger, and specifically some of our offensive players I would like to move on from. But I do think the investment, especially in shorter term deals with Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw, could be really beneficial to this team. And I think if they revamp in some spots and they are healthier going against a weaker division, I completely agree with you that I think next year they will perform better. Still doesn't mean I think Brock Purdy should be paid $60 million, but
He shouldn't,
um,
but he will, or close to it,
okay.
in my opinion. I make it sound so definitive. I shouldn't do that. But
I know.
you look
No
at the
one will be.
Yorks, you look at Kyle, and by default, they're going to sign because they're going to be worried about repeating this year's mistake. They're not going to want Brock to hold out. So they're going to cave at the end to make sure that he's in camp.
Now, I want to transition a little bit. I have even more quotes about Brock Purdy and getting paid. Richard Sherman basically said that he should get paid, 50 plus, whatever.
Yeah.
But
You can argue the number, but again, it comes down to if they're focused on Brock as the future face of the franchise, then it's Brock. It's not going to be anybody else.
yeah,
And if they don't want to repeat this year, then they're going to sign him, and we just have to accept it. And now, I'm not saying that that's correct. I'm not saying that's the right decision. It isn't.
it's
But
more just
this is
what's
what
happening.
happens when the Yorks are the owners and Kyle is the de facto GM. This is what you end up with. Do I agree with it? Not at all. Do I expect it to happen? Yeah.